It's also been in CDC reports. It's also been in transcripts from the pandemic influenza committees of the CDC and the NIH. So this is very odd to me. First of all, vaccination season, if you can call it that, is usually August, September, October. It's in the fall. Flu season is generally over by spring. But yet they're going to continue to make vaccine until they have enough vaccine to vaccinate over 300 million people, which is one vaccine for every man, woman, and child in this country, which is something that they started talking about back with the smallpox vaccine in 2001. And now it looks as though they're going to proceed with that concept to be able to do that with the flu shot here coming up in 2009. So when they design these experiments, is what I've been calling this research, is really truly an experiment and they've got people all over the country volunteering to be a part of this clinical trial and in order to volunteer, you're giving somewhere between $250 and $450, which to some people may be a lot of money, but how much money is it really if that vaccine can damage you for life? And who are they designing these initial studies on? Well, initially the studies are going to be initially done on adults that are between 16 and 64 years of age, so normal, healthy adults. They're also going to have clinical trials that are going to be going on in people over what they call the elderly, which is people over 65 years of age. The two vaccines that are going to be tested are going to be Sanofi Pasteur and CSL laboratory or biotherapies that are here in the U.S., and they're going to be the ones without the adjuvant. Remember, the adjuvant is the AS03 or the MS59. AS03 is experimental. MS59 has only been used in a limited way in vaccines in Europe. Neither have been approved for use in the U.S. How the trials are going to be designed is that they're going to have two different trials. One trial where they're going to give 2 injections 21 days apart at 15 milligrams or micrograms of virus. The other one's going to be 2 injections of 30 micrograms of virus 21 days apart. And if it looks as though in that 21-day period of time that these are going to be safe, they're going to start another clinical trial on children 6 to 17 months of age. Or 6 months of age to 6 months of age to 17 years of age. Concurrently, there's going to be other trials that are going to be going on to see if you can get the flu shot and the swine flu shot at the same time. So they're going to be designing clinical trials to see if you should get the swine flu shot before, at the same time, or after the seasonal flu shots. And if those look like within the first 21 days, as if they're going to be safe and create antibody levels in people, then they're going to have the same type of trials going on in healthy children 6 months of age to 17 years old. So they're only 21 days. They're only looking for side effects and reactions for 21 days. Long-term autoimmune problems and complications like arthritis and autoimmune disease takes months to develop. In 21 days, they're not going to have a very large safety study. And the same thing with going into children. When they're healthy children, the problem with that is that once the vaccines are trialed on healthy children and then they're approved, they're given to all children, even children with chronic diseases, even though those children have never been tested to see whether or not there's anything that has to do with safety at all. So these are the types of clinical trials that the government has going on to decide whether or not these new vaccines are safe or they're going to have any effect on you at all, or if they're going to be protective, which means develop an antibody. Now, the National Allergy and Asthma and the Infectious Disease, the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases Vaccine and Treatment Evaluation Units, these are where all the clinical trials are going to be going on across the country. They're in Houston and Cincinnati. It's going to be coming up on your screen here in just a second. Oh gosh, what happened? I'm hoping that you can. There you go. That you can see that all of these different places is where the clinical trials are happening in Houston, and Cincinnati, and Atlanta, and Seattle, and St. Louis, and Iowa, and Baltimore, and Nashville, Tennessee. They're all major institutions, and this is where all the clinical trials and people are volunteering to participate. So once they decide that these are safe, once they say, okay, after 21 days, we're not having a lot of side effects and reactions, who will be the first ones to get the vaccines? Who are the ones that the government has decided that that are the first people who should be the ones to get the vaccines? Well, on July 29th, which is just a couple of days from now, the ACIP, which is the Advisory Committee of Immunization Practices, will vote on who should be the first in line to get the vaccine. So now they've decided, they're going to decide that it's safe if they're going to start a mass vaccination campaign. The first ones that they say are children 0 to 4 years of age, followed by school-age children. This comes out of the smallpox literature when they say it's those dirty little children who are dirty and not washing their hands and picking their noses and eating food and all these different things. They're the ones who spread these viruses, and so we must vaccinate them first. After that are going to be children with asthma and pregnant women who are considered to be the highest risk, and then emergency response workers. As we speak, there are panels in hospitals across the country, in hospitals that are voting on whether or not to make the swine flu vaccine a mandatory part for all healthcare workers who work in hospitals, whether you have direct patient care contact or not. They were voting this week in a big meeting in New York State to decide that. The nurses' organizations were fighting vehemently against it. But not only are they looking at that in New York, if you Google that of whether or not there's a policy about flu shots to happen this fall, it's happening in New York, it's happening here in Cleveland, in Los Angeles. All of these teaching hospitals and large institutions are voting to see whether or not they should make this as getting the flu shot and the swine flu shot as mandatory. The government says that everyone should expect to get at least 3 flu shots this fall. If you've had flu shots in the past, that you should get a regular flu shot plus 2 swine flu shots 3 weeks apart. The reasoning behind that is that this is a new virus that you've supposedly never been exposed to before, and without having previous exposure, then you need a second one to give you a booster. They're talking about giving children 4 flu shots this fall. If your child has never had a flu shot before, they're supposed to get a regular flu shot and a booster, then a swine flu shot and a booster. And the Secretary, Arne Duncan, who said he was absolutely welcome the idea of nation schools being the principal venue for delivering the vaccine, he called them natural sites and said that it was fine to open our doors to be part of a solution that really makes sense. There have been, Secretary Sebelius has been talking to school principals and to state educational associations across the country about preparing your schools to be the vaccination centers as soon as the school doors open the end of August, the first part of September, not only for children but also for parents who can come there and get their free vaccine given to them by the government. There have been some reports where informed consent may not be part of the big issue here. If they decide that this is an emergency and everyone needs to be emergently vaccinated, there are some reports that your child may get vaccinated and bring home a little sheet of paper telling you, guess what, I got my vaccine at school today. Now, those are unconfirmed reports, and they are just some things that have been like floating around in the legislature, which tells me to tell all of you that one of the most important things that you can be doing right now is taking this information to your local schools, your local school teachers, your school principals, your daycare workers, your helpers, the first responders that are going to be in line for these vaccines, people like your paramedics and your police and your firemen, and letting them know what's in these vaccines and that there's a real problem. You can't do everything, but there are certainly things that you can help with. There's a new website that I've been working on right now. It's called pandemicfluonline.com, pandemicfluonline.com. There are tools there that a lot of us have created. They're downloadable flyers, trifolds, they're downloadable trifold folders, they're brochures, they are paragraphs that you can put into your local newspapers in order to help you get out and get active and let people know about this. Now, the vaccines that we're going to be given, this is the breakdown across the U.S. of where these are going to be manufactured from. 46% from Novartis, 26% from Sanofi Pasteur, 19% of our vaccines are going to be coming from Australia, which I find that pretty interesting, from CSL. 3% from GlaxoSmithKline, and even though we put $61 billion into MedImmune's pocket to make the flu mist, about 6% of the vaccines should be coming from there. Now, some of you may be thinking that perhaps the best thing to do, really, is to get that one that goes up your nose, because at least that way it's not going to be injected into your system with all those other potential nasty chemicals and things that are in there. But flu mist is not going to be any safer than the flu shot. Remember, we said that they were going to have concentrated amounts of viruses in the thing that goes up the nose, and the nasal mucosa has been found to be innervated with nerve receptors and parasympathetic nerve receptors that play careful, coordinated roles in regulating our glands, our blood vessels, and other types of processes. This is new research that just came out in March of this year, and so we have to be very careful about shooting viruses up our nose. And we also have to be very careful of what happens if these flu shots become, these swine flu shots of 2009 turn very deadly like the flu shots did in 1976. I'm sure that a lot of you who've been very active to things that have been going on here have been saying that there is, you can probably remember that the swine flu shot in 1976, only one person actually died from swine flu, and there were about 300 and some others that were seriously injured, some that died, some that got Guillain-Barré syndrome. Well, and the government funded a program back, the Guillain-Barré and the swine flu pandemic fund, for those people that got injured and were permanently disabled. Well, in this swine flu shot, that there is a new law that was passed in 2006 that they call it PREPA for short. And PREPA stands for the 2006 Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, which allows for the Secretary of Health and Human Services to invoke complete immunity from liability for vaccine and drug manufacturers in a declared emergency. Furthermore, it not only protects the drug companies, it actually protects all of those people out there in the government and at the CDC, and it's all of those people who said that who agreed to this, all the government program planners, they also have a complete liability waiver. This was signed into effect July 17th of 2009. So if there are any problems, if there's any injury, damage, death, there's no liability and no place to go. In an executive order that came from President Obama's office 2 weeks ago, when he actually funded gave the $1.8 billion for the additional flu shot purchases, it said that we should set up a program for people in case they get injured, but to date that program is not funded. So even though there is supposedly in place, there's no funding into it. So if you take this shot and you get hurt, there's no compensation. You know, PREPA also removes the right to a jury trial for persons injured from this vaccine unless the plaintiff can provide clear evidence of willful misconduct that resulted in death or serious physical injury, and gets permission from the Department of Health and Human Services to sue for compensation and for damages. Now, one of the horrible things it does for this, and I have to give Dr. Merle Nass credit for digging out this information, because what this does is that it encourages them to not do any additional research, because if there's no incentive to make the vaccine safe, and there's actually a disincentive to do research, because what if during their research they found out and they knew ahead of time that this vaccine could possibly cause damage? Well, then that would be willful misconduct. And if there's not a lot of research before we start using it, then we certainly couldn't have possibly known that this could have caused damage down the road. So we've got a serious issue here with liability, and for any person who takes this vaccine, any problems that may arise to them, there's probably going to be little, if any, compensation that's going to come down the road. So if those adjuvants that we talked about, those things to spread out the vaccine, are not approved for use in this country, why are the government spending so much money to buy it? Why is the U.S. government buying all these adjuvants? Because it's not approved for use in the U.S. at all. The flu shot adjuvants are not licensed in the U.S. There's another type of product that Novartis is using, and they're called cell lines. And you may have heard a little bit about some of the cell line information